I take it as on. I'm sorry I've been away for so long. I'm not even really ready to do a video right now. I seem to start things and then just let them go. It's about time I stopped doing that. Coming to the end of 2020. Thank God. I'm not all about gloom and doom in 2021 either. I think we got to stop ending that or mm, start looking upwards instead of constantly in fear of the others. So much of what we put out there comes back. You know, what you're fearful of is what you manifest. If 2020 didn't show that, I don't know what else will. I just wanted to put a video out there and start talking again. I wanted to talk about a love story, actually, two love stories, mainly due to my job at Overhead Door. I was mainly doing commercial electrical work, but I also did residential work. Two totally different fields of commercial and residential. The jobs that were given to me in residential, I really didn't want to be doing residential. But in Delaware, there wasn't that much commercial, so I actually filled in and did a lot of residential work just to stay busy. Some great stories came out of that, and that's actually one I've actually talked of before, and the other one I've never talked in public about. But my whole thing is just my concept of love. I said I was going to speak on Greek love, which Lori's so great at, and I kind of drifted off of that earlier because what I'm talking about isn't the Greek love. I don't even have the concept of the Greek complexity of love and apogee and all those different forms of love. I always consider it as being a narrow focus or a wide focus. That's just the way I see things. I'm always simplistic in the way that I talk. Even in my electrical work, everything that I think of is extremely simplistic. The truth is actually simple. It doesn't have to be complex and all written out. And the truth is always simple. When you get the complexities in there, that's when the crap comes on. We live in a three-dimensional world, yet we think in this two-dimensional, write it down type thing. But it's apogee does not fit what I was going through. To me, it's a soul separation. My soul and my being were two separate things. And the conflict that everybody's seen earlier this year and maybe even last year, I'm not even sure when it started, was those two things in battle with each other. So I wanted to kind of get on that topic and pick these two stories to start off going that way. First story, I was called to a job, and that job was just repairing the bottom of a door seal. And when I got to the job, I had a old man sitting in a lawn chair at the door, and I was like, "Oh crap, he's gonna sit there the whole time while I'm working. He's gonna be in my way." I'm kind of run and gun and get it done kind of person. I don't like having customers sitting there basically watching everything that I do. I don't think anybody in the service industry likes it. In fact, when somebody's doing something for me, like installing this line that I just recently had so I could start doing videos, I talked to him for a little bit and I just let him go do his business. He was running late. It was like 6 o'clock at night. But anyway, let me get back to this story. I got to the job and the old man, very old man, was sitting in the chair pretty much right underneath the door while I'm trying to fix the bottom of the door, put a new weather seal on. And the whole time I was doing it, he was criticizing me. That's not the way I would do it. That's not the way you should be doing. And I was kind of laughing him off, saying, "Oh, how would you do it?" I said, "This is the fastest way to get this thing done." Anyway, we got to talk, and he was 95, around 95 years old. And we began talking about his cars and all that, and how he ended up with this house. And everything this man said to me kind of blew me away. This whole meeting that I had with him just blew me away. 95 years old, the man was basically born and very young during the Depression, and we began talking on that subject. Very light-hearted person, actually very nice. After I got past him, wanting to sit in and get in my way on the job, but and picking on me, but it was that kind of male thing of, you ain't doing it right, I'm going to do it. At that age, you ain't doing too much, but he just had a way about him that when he started talking about the Depression and all that, I was like, well, how did you make it through the Depression? What do you remember and all that? The man had an incredible memory. He basically said Depression was for the rich people. He lived out on a farm. They didn't actually even feel the Depression, didn't even know that it really existed. He said when everybody else was hitting the hard thing, he said, living on a farm, we produced our own food, we took care of and made our own energy. We didn't even have electrical power at that time, so we didn't really miss nothing. We didn't lose anything. We just kept right on going through. Being 95 years of age, it kind of blew me away that what he had seen during his life. Anyway, I got the job done, the door completed, got it working and all that. And he was telling me that yeah, this was his grandson's house. He gave it to us. And I was like, well, that's nice of him. And he was like, when he said the word gave, I thought he meant just gave him a house to live in. But no, it wasn't that. It was that his grandson had passed away. And in the will, he had wrote that he knew his grandfather was going to still be alive, and that he was to take over the house if he was still living. His grandson was one of the C-17 transport that ran out of Dover as far as carrying materials over to Iraq and Afghanistan. And he only had basically a short life. Only lived about 30. And coming from his grandfather, that was a pretty heavy thing, because when he said gave, I thought he meant he gave it to him that he was still alive. But no, he said that, all of his kids were already dead. And his grandsons and grandkids pretty much were dying. And he was actually so lighthearted and such a beautiful person that I couldn't get over the way he was talking about this, kind of like it didn't really affect him. When it came to the end of the job and all that, and he started talking about his sweet pea, but sweet pea will fill out the check for me. I thought the man was nuts, but no, he wasn't nuts. I got done, put all my tools back in the truck, and he invited me into the kitchen. And I'm thinking, yeah, this man's nuts. There's no way that his wife's still alive. But his wife still was alive. And when I got into the kitchen, these were like two teenage kids. It was amazing to see. I mean, she was right there up with them, like 93, I believe. And they actually were childhood sweethearts. And it's a very powerful thing to see somebody that at such a young age to find each other and to make it through all these years living in, in their illusions. And they weren't religious. They were just so much into each other, and it was like so amazing to meet somebody that old that had so much knowledge to give and just poured it out with anybody. It was like, it was so funny to so loving to be around people like that. I've told this story before, and that's actually why I'm telling it again. I'm not a good storyteller. I just need to start talking more. But it was powerful to be around them because it just kind of like rocked my mind. It's kind of like what everybody wants is that perfect connection, that yin and yang, and the life that they had built through the Depression, through World War II, and still going strong, strong enough that the grandson actually wrote their name in the will for that house. That if anything happened to him, being young, joining the military and all that, I'm sure he kind of wrote it as a joke because he didn't have a family of his own. That, hey, just go leave it to my granddad. He's not going to die. And for him still to be living, and it was like so full of life. It's a very powerful story. They said last time I told this on YouTube. I think it was on YouTube. Pretty sure it was on YouTube. But everybody asked if I ever went back to hang out with them, and I never did because it was amazing to be as old as they were and still be in that kind of almost honeymoon bubble that went for 75 years. They were married. As soon as they got out of school, they got married. During the time of the Depression, me and him talked about his car. His Model A was the very first car he ever owned. And he could remember all the settings and all that. I was asking him how it was to have a vehicle back in that day that could run on anything, and he was telling me about the turpentine and being able to use his paint thinners and all that to run a car. I was like, yeah, nowadays they talk about hybrids and a multi-fuel. And back then, he came with that farmer spirit that he could do anything. You know, just give him long enough, he'll figure it out. And it was just mind numbing to me because me doing commercial work, I never had that kind of connection with people, but doing residential work, I was always coming into people's lives and all that. And that the richness actually comes from working with the people. The contract stuff, most of the time doing commercial work, it's just get in, get out, and move on as fast as possible. But just like that, doing that job for them, it only took me like 15 minutes to fix the bottom of the door and then go through and check it all out real quick. But I ended up spending probably 45 minutes talking to those two. It was amazing to see people could go that long, still that much, be that much in love with one another. I could not imagine, one of them passing away and the other person being put into a nursing home. Their richness, their beauty as elders. I mean, there was something to be gained out of just meeting those people. A second story is the same as the first, except for it didn't end that way. Those people only had a very short togetherness. Anyway, I don't want to depress the crap out of anybody. What I'm getting at is the matrix. If every circle is a person, how much we influence others, our intermediate friends, to the seed of life behind me. This is the seed of life. That's it's those interconnections that we have with one another. the undue influences that we get from our inner circle, from the larger communities that we're into. That is what matriarchal thing is, not the competition with one another, keeping up with the Joneses, but that everybody in that circle in the community kind of rides off the energy of everybody else. So much today, this is destroyed by TV, media, things outside of us, things we have no control over, that we don't even take care of those people closest to us. The whole thing between matriarchal and patriarchal, I'm actually not getting at those 2 points. I'm actually getting at the interconnectedness of human beings. Me just sharing this on here, I'm sharing the energy of people I'm sure have long gone. So many times, because of the financial strains, we just put these people in the warehouses and wait for them to die. Which those people, with their stories, with his story of, I mainly talked to him about the heavier stuff with the going through that whole 1920s, 1930s, all the way up to World War II. He was unaffected by it because he was out of those cities. How much stress was put on those people in the cities, and why weren't they living as long as he was? It was because he didn't have the stress. He never went through the stress. When it came time of World War II, he was there to jump on, and luckily nothing happened to him. But keeping things local, taking care of those closest to us. I want to get on a political thing with this whole thing of Republicans and Democrats and what we focus on. I've gotten into very long talks on that, how politics doesn't matter. I'm a longtime Republican. And the reason why I'm a Republican was because I've seen the corruption in the Democratic Party in my local state, and the whole thing of being a Republican was all about the presidency and being conservative. Liberal, Democrat, doesn't matter. They're freaking giving money to all these other countries. It doesn't focus down or trickle down to us when our money system is controlled by these groups that are outside of this country. If you think the Federal Reserve is an American company, it's not. It's the same as the IMF. It's a monetary fund. It has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with the local community or connections with us. The story of them, that was a local community, Dover, Delaware, right there outside the airport. In fact, when I went in their house, it was one of those things that got me was in honor of their grandson. They had a picture of his airplane and him in uniform up on the wall. It's kind of a polar opposite to me. Instead of looking up to the parents, they were looking down at their grandkid. They didn't have pictures of their parents or they didn't have things to remind them of the past. In fact, they were so much in a bubble that the day-to-day existence didn't really matter to them. They were still like teenagers to be around. Yet they were 90 years old, and but giving the house to them with their grandson, it was like they were joking and laughing about their grandson, how great of a person he is because they were living in his house. We have things so messed up, so delusional, so insane, so pathetic going on today. So I say, I mean, we can't just go back to the way it was because the way it was isn't the right path. I'm still not too sure about telling the second story, but I wanted to put that on another video. This is mainly just a test, just to get me out here and get me talking again. Second story goes at the spiritual nature. The second story goes at the spiritual nature of our existence. As I said, the two stories, these two stories are, these two meetings happened, I'd say within the same week, maybe 2 weeks apart at the most, about 10 years ago. They're the same thing, but one jumped off the tracks where this one didn't. But being in tune, listening to the things that aren't said, getting feelings, intuitions before you even go to a job. The second job, I twice said to my boss that day that something wasn't right about it, and I didn't know what it was. Once you have a greater intuition of things going on, those things that we can't label, you have to learn to listen to your intuitions. Not what other people say, just listen to yourself. I will tell the next story and then get on to my me dropping off of here for a while to listen to my own self about this past year. It's listening to your intuition. The connectivity that you have is all that you need to understand. There's no great book or thing. I always say that you don't need to read that stuff. It's all within, and it is. We all have our personal, our different upbringings, but the DNA that's coded inside of us from our ancestors is still much well within us. I don't know how many times my mother used to say I was just like my grandfather, whom I never met. She was talking about my hard headedness and the way I would argue things. It would have to be proven to me 100% before I would believe anything. And it was the same way with my grandfather who fled Russia. 1910. For the longest time, I've just wanted to know why would somebody at the age of freaking, I think 16, just up and leave. He did bring his best friend with him, came over here to Philadelphia. And then reading their thing, it was all because of World War One or pre-World War One. The government was basically writing down a census saying how many kids of age and who had to be sent. If in a time of war, would you, put your life on the line for your country? Ukraine, Russia at the time, those people were, for 1,000 years before that, were constantly in battles with other countries. Ukraine area changed hands so many times. It's actually amazing to me. I didn't even know until last year about the whole Galaxia. Never even heard of it. It's not in many history books. But that area changed hands so many times. It was part of a greater country. And talking to people from living over there, they kept telling me I was Lithuanian, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian. But really, it was just the time periods that changed. But the people, it was about local community. And the whole thing with what was going on over there, even before the Bolshevik Revolution and all that was community. If the community was getting polarized at that time, same as what's going on today. This society is the polarization. 16-year-old thing, he's seen America as being something great, and let's go over there. And if you read about that, it was the Jewish and Gypsies' time too. It was the great purge from that area. They wanted out of that area. They didn't want to have nothing to do with the states going to war with one another. They pretty much were seeing it before it even happened. It was time to get out of there. And for many years, I said I was getting out of here because the writing was on the wall, even back in the 90s, that I often bring up the whole thing of Tiananmen Square because Tiananmen Square, I wanted America to stand up to China and say, you can't do that to people. That was started by the kids, and the kids were crying for America. They were quoting our freaking Constitution. And when they were quoting it, they had the working parties, and China started supporting him. And that's at the point that they went in there and started crushing and killing those people. The whole thing with Tank Man actually happened after freaking Tiananmen Square. The rewriting of the history is just amazing to me. I mean, what was going through the head of the man who stood up to that tank was he knew what was going on there, even though their local newspapers weren't talking about it. He was seeing and hearing from locals talking about, the execution. And one of the things about Tank Man that I always bring up is the person that was driving that tank. I'm sure he was getting an earful on his headset from those other tanks and from his thing to just keep moving, don't freaking stop. It was one person's life. They didn't care about it. He was going through a great deal of pressure inside that tank. He could have very easily kept on going or just didn't even pay attention to it. They always show you the clip of that guy standing up to the tank, but that actually went on for several minutes. He went up and was beating on the tank and wanting to talk to that person. And I'm sure that person in that tank was getting an earful from his commanding officer to just move. Don't sit there. It took those two parties to create what you call Tank Man nowadays. The man inside the tank was just as much under pressure not to kill him standing in front of that tank. I mean, one person versus a tank. It's like if he would have been just crushed and ran over, it would have never been headlines. It would have never been headlines. So both of those people in that picture were very compassionate people. It's not really man versus the state at that level, because I'm sure any one of those other tanks sitting behind him would not have stopped. Would have just kept on going. My assumption. That was communism. It would not release the news. And America's pretty much the same way now with not releasing the news, things that matter. Just follow orders and keep on going. We need to stop this. I went back to matriarchal and thinking about things like this because this has been going on for thousands of years. And with the flower of life, that carving in Egypt, it's always stuck in my head what they were actually talking about. When I'm wiring up a system on doors, most of the time I don't use wiring diagrams anymore because it's so much ingrained in my head about the way to do things and safety things and all. I actually want to teach electrical or show you the simplistic. There's so much fear in something you can't see. And first thing I'd always have to do with my helpers is break them from that fear so they could understand the simplicity of it. I always say you're not my helper, you're my replacement. I'm going to train you that way. So when I don't come in, you can replace me on that day you walk in, have the confidence to take my truck away from you. That's the way we need to be, is not fearful that we're going to lose our jobs if we don't give that knowledge to the next person. But so many times, it's, don't talk about it, just, keep making the money. All my helpers are trained to replace me. That's the way we need to be, as open source, not protectionist of our egos and our drive, but be open to it. I'm not great at talking. I'm more of a listener than a talker, so it actually kills me to get on here and actually talk. Most of the time, I have a lot of fear within me about talking publicly because I talk about things that people don't understand. My boss would always say, just shut up and do it. How long is it going to take you? Just shut up and do it. Don't try to explain it to me because I'm not going to understand you, even though I talk in very simple terms. That's my biggest problem with union electricians. They always have to remember every part's name and all that, and they right off the bat, if you go in an electrical store, they think you're not an electrician because you don't know those names. And I get in and talking about ghosting a machine and seeing voltages that shouldn't be there. That's explosion proof operators. If I'm reading something like 75 volts, you don't realize that heat, um, spinning equipment close to the wires and all that can actually develop a magnetic, a actual pulse that actually can make your meters read voltages. I have to go through that stuff and figure out why I'm seeing this stuff because it will blow up my equipment. When it comes to explosion proof, part of the reason why it is explosion proof. Back in the day, they used to use high voltage wires, but just put it in very rigid stuff so it wouldn't get broke. But nowadays, it's very minute voltages, volt and a half, less than like 2 watts. And the normal tester meter is actually 3 watts. You blow it up in a heartbeat. Anyway, I'm going way off the tracks. Peace and love, all. And I'll get back to doing videos. The next one's kind of more of a heavier story. I'm sure many are actually going to judge me over it. That's one of the reasons why I actually wouldn't tell that story for 10 years because of the judgment that comes with it. But in truth, it's listening to that intuition. There was a conversation that went on afterwards about making peace with myself over this story. I had to tell the whole story to somebody else just to see how far off I was because I could have made a call, but I didn't. I wouldn't. Anyway, peace and love, all. That next story, hopefully tomorrow, if not, maybe Friday night, or by, let's just say, the weekend, because I know I'm horrible. Every time I say I'm going to do something in 2020, it gets pushed off. As far as electrical work, I'm going to start showing that simplistic. Um, I think it's something that everybody needs to know. As far as getting off the grid and being able to control your own power that you need. I mean, truthfully, if you have vegetables, you can stick rods down in them and have enough energy to charge your cell phone. It doesn't cost that much to be doing crazy things like that. You look on YouTube and see it. Peace and love, all. I'll be talking to you later.